We now move on to the filtration fraction of the renal plasma physiology. Now, in the renal system, we have the filtration fraction, which is basically found from dividing the GFR by the RPF, which is the renal plasma flow. Now, what is the GFR? The GFR is basically the volume of plasma that enters here and is basically filtered, right? It's filtered into the Bowman space in 1 minute. So the volume of plasma that comes into this afferent arteriole and gets filtered out into the Bowman space, right? That filtered out plasma is the GFR. That is your glomerular filtration rate. Basically, how much plasma is being filtered into the Bowman space is your glomerular filtration rate. Now, there is something called as renal plasma flow. What is renal plasma flow? It's the volume of plasma that's delivered to the kidneys per minute. All the amount of plasma in 1 minute that's being delivered to this kidney is your renal plasma flow, right? So the normal value of the filtration fraction is 20%. This 20% means that's only 1/5 of the plasma entering the kidney is filtered. The remaining 80% continues to the efferent arteriole. So the remaining 80% continues to this efferent arteriole and then goes to the peritubular capillaries and then to the venous outflow. Now, why this filtration fraction matters and why it's important? This filtration fraction determines the oncotic pressure in the peritubular capillaries and influences the tubular reabsorption of sodium, water, and urea. So, depending on this filtration fraction, the downflow of this efferent arteriolar plasma is dependent on what is happening in this filtration fraction. This dynamics will be easier to understand when we properly understand that this afferent arteriole brings in the plasma that is being filtered into this Bowman space, and the urine flows out and is excreted from here. Now, there's something called the net filtration pressure. Look at this net filtration pressure. This brings in our Starling forces, right? So the net filtration includes the plasma glomerular capillary pressure. So this is your plasma glomerular capillary pressure, right? Let me show it to you here. This is your plasma glomerular capillary pressure. Now, this plus the oncotic pressure of the Bowman space. The Bowman space oncotic pressure, this Bowman space oncotic pressure is usually 0 unless there's nephrotic syndrome or minimal change disease and protein is being leaked out through the effacement of podocytes. Otherwise, this oncotic pressure is going to be 0. Why it's going to be 0? Why it's going to be 0? Because usually you don't have any protein leaking out into Bowman space, right? So this minus the plasma Bowman space pressure. This is the plasma Bowman space pressure. So in the Bowman space, the plasma Bowman space pressure plus the oncotic pressure of the glomerular capillary. Look at this, the oncotic pressure of the glomerular capillary, which is usually going to be pretty high. Why? Because you have all the proteins flowing out back into the efferent arteriole. Proteins are not filtered into the Bowman space naturally unless some problem is happening, unless there's some abnormality. ओके हमारे पास फिर ये प्लाज्मा बोमन स्पेस प्रेशर है, ठीक है, और फिर हमारे पास ऑनकॉटिक प्रेशर है ग्लोमेरुलर कैपिलरीज में, जो नॉर्मली ज़्यादा ही होता है, ठीक है। आज ये देखने के बाद हम आगे चलते हैं दो और कॉन्सेप्ट्स में जो कि इंपॉर्टेंट है। हमारे पास एफरेंट आर्टीरियोल, द एफरेंट आर्टीरियोल बेसिकली हैज़ ऑल द प्लाज्मा दैट इज अराइविंग टू द आर्टीरियोल, राइट? सो ऑल द प्लाज्मा दैट इज अराइविंग टू द आर्टीरियोल can be this area afferent arteriole can be dilated. It can be dilated by the basis of prostaglandins. Prostaglandins preferentially dilate this on the basis of whenever there is increased renal plasma flow, there is increased glomerular filtration rate. In these conditions, we have the dilation of the afferent arteriole, and this is responsible by the NSAIDs. Okay, so the NSAIDs basically do this. They increase the plasma, they dilate the afferent arterioles, and wait a second. The prostaglandins dilate the afferent arteriole and the NSAIDs inhibit this. Okay, so the NSAIDs inhibit the dilation of the afferent arteriole, and this is why the NSAIDs can cause tubular injury, because acute tubular injury can be caused by taking NSAIDs in cases when the dilation is helpful, right? So this is something that we should know. The next thing we should Before moving on to the next thing is that the NSAIDs inhibit prostaglandins, and this will cause the afferent constriction. Once the afferent constriction happens, your GFR will drop, and since the GFR drops, there you are predisposed to acute kidney injury. A small vignette I would like to mention here is that if there's an elderly patient and that elderly patient takes NSAIDs and creatinine is rising, this is basically acute kidney injury. Another thing that you should know that the efferent arteriole, this is the plasma that is leaving the efferent arteriole. This is the unfiltered plasma that not get filtered and went away, right? The 80% of the plasma, 20% is filtered, 20% is the filtration fraction. The 20% of the filtered plasma goes and becomes the urine, right? The other plasma that's leaving the efferent arteriole and going on to the peritubular capillaries, basically the efferent arteriole, here the efferent arteriole can be constricted by angiotensin 2. When does this happen? For example, in shock or in dehydration, in cases where there's low flow and the kidney needs to preserve the GFR despite a decreased renal plasma flow. This is done to preserve the glomerular filtration, the GFR, right? So filtration fraction in this case is, by the way, increases. Anyways, the constriction is done by the angiotensin 2, and there are drugs like the ACE inhibitors, the glabaflozin, not the flozin, the Prils, all the Pril drugs. Basically, the Pril drugs are acting on the um, angiotensin 2 enzyme, angiotensin 2 here, and what happens is that the ACE inhibitors block it, and which is why the ACE inhibitors, all the drugs like lisinopril, all the drugs that end in pril, they inhibit the action of the ACE inhibitor. The angiotensin 2 levels decrease. Since the angiotensin 2 levels decrease, you usually see dilation in the efferent arteriole. Now, this is not good for the body. Why this is not good for the body? Because actually the angiotensin 2 preserves the filtration here by constricting. Why it constricts? Because in cases where there's bilateral renal stenosis, bilateral renal artery stenosis, or there's the solitary functioning kidney, the efferent there's an angiotensin 2 that preferentially constricts the efferent arteriole, right? So what happens is ACE inhibitors instead dilate it. They dilate it and they reduce the glomerular pressure, and the GFR falls, and now this is dangerous in cases where there's bilateral renal artery stenosis or a solitary functioning kidney, right? So just a heads up, the prostaglandins dilate. The NSAIDs inhibit the prostaglandins, so they constrict the afferent. The afferent otherwise is dilated by prostaglandins. Then you have the efferent. The efferent is naturally constricted by angiotensin 2, but ACE inhibitors inhibit this angiotensin 2, and therefore ACE inhibitors dilate this efferent, right? The afferent is the incoming plasma, the efferent is the exiting plasma. Okay, now we have some changes that we should understand here. The afferent arteriolar constriction, efferent arteriole. Okay, so for example, if I take the afferent arteriole and I constrict this pipe here, I put a rubber band around this pipe here, and the plasma that's flowing in, what will happen? Since I have less plasma that's flowing in, and I have the renal plasma flow that is coming out is also decreased. Why? Because less is coming in. If less is coming in, even less is going out. So what happens is, whenever my afferent arteriole is constricted, the incoming plasma is less, so my renal plasma flow decreases, and since I am constricting it, my GFR also decreases. Since both of them decreases by the same proportion, filtration fraction is unaffected. This is the first case, right? Now the next case is the efferent arteriolar constriction. If I have the efferent arteriole here and I constrict it by putting a rubber band around it, what happens is the outgoing plasma is going to be blocked, right? The outgoing plasma is going to block, so renal plasma flow is going to decrease, and since I'm going to create a back pressure, the back pressure is going to increase the GFR. So GFR is increasing and renal plasma flow is decreasing, so filtration fraction is obviously increasing. Then I have the plasma protein concentration. Now the plasma proteins are normally found in this glomerular capillaries. So the plasma protein in glomerular capillaries are represented by the oncotic pressure of glomerular capillary size, right? So if there's increased plasma protein concentration for some reason in multiple myeloma or certain cases, what happens is that in dehydration or multiple myeloma, this glomerular capillary oncotic pressure rises because there is increased protein concentration, and the fluid is pulled back into the capillary. Since it's like the thick blood resists filtration. If I'm using a strainer and my fluid is really, really thick, it's not going to be strained easily. But if my fluid is very thin, the straining will happen very easily. So this is like my fluid passing through the strainer. If my fluid is thick due to an increased plasma protein concentration, what will happen? My GFR will fall. My GFR will fall, and because my GFR is falling, my filtration fraction will also fall. The thick blood is going to resist filtration. Now the other way around, if my plasma protein concentration is going to fall, my blood is going to become thin. Since it's thin, my GFR is going to increase. It's very easy for my plasma to get filtered. So my GFR is going to increase. Since my GFR is going to increase, my filtration fraction is also going to be increased. This happens in cases where we have nephrotic syndrome. In nephrotic syndrome, there's effacements of the podocytes. All these podocytes, in the visceral layer, they become far apart, and the protein is able to leak, and the normal charge is lost on the membrane, and the protein is able to leak here. Since the protein is able to leak here, filtration becomes very easy. And in nephrotic syndrome, in early cases, in the earlier states, you find the GFR being increased. The next is constriction of the ureter. Why will I have constriction of the ureter? I may have a stone in my ureter, I may have benign prostatic hyperplasia, or maybe after the kidney there's some post-renal obstruction due to which my ureter is being constricted. Now what will happen if the ureter is being constricted here? This is my urine being excreted. If I put a rubber band around here and there's a constriction here, what will happen? Back pressure will happen in the Bowman space. If in the Bowman space the back pressure is happening, what will happen? Filtration will be opposed. So there will be less filtration. Why there will be less filtration? Because the filtration is not happening. GFR is going to fall. Glomerular filtration rate is going to fall. And my filtration rate will eventually fall. This usually happens in post-renal acute kidney injuries. And in post-renal acute kidney injuries, you will find that the filtration, the fraction of excretion of sodium is always more than 2%. We will see that in the next page. Now we come into the dehydration states. In volume depletion states, what happens is the mechanism is that the volume of plasma entering basically falls, and the renal plasma flow falls because depletion state hai, dehydration hai. So what happens is we have GFR that is falling. The GFR falls, the renal plasma flow falls, and since both of them are falling, but the renal plasma flow is falling in more proportion than the GFR, the filtration fraction increases. Since there is very little renal plasma flow and the GFR isn't falling as much as the renal plasma flow is falling, the filtration fraction ultimately increases. And this happens in pre-renal azotemia. How do you know that something has pre-renal azotemia? In a pre-renal azotemia situation, what happens is that the fraction of excretion of sodium is less than 1%. Whenever it's less than 1%, you have pre-renal azotemia. And when it's more than 2%, you have post-renal azotemia or some acute kidney injury. Okay, now we move on to calculation of reabsorption and secretion rate. Now, calculation and reabsorption of secretion rate is very important for sodium because it helps us understand if an injury is pre-renal or post, or it's happening inside the kidney, like acute tubular necrosis. So as I was saying, we have the calculation of reabsorption and secretion rate. किसी भी substance की filtration और reabsorption rate को निकालने के लिए हमारे पास सबसे पहले एक filtered load होना चाहिए. Filtered load is basically the GFR into the plasma concentration of that substance. And then the excretion rate is basically the flow of urine into the plasma, the urine concentration of the substance. ठीक है, ये दोनों चीज़ें हमें समझ आ गई. Now reabsorption rate क्या होता है? filtered वॉल्यूम में से आप एक्सक्रीटेड वॉल्यूम निकाल रहे हैं तो ये reabsorption है. और सिक्रीशन रेट क्या होता है? सिक्रीशन रेट इज़ बेसिकली एक्सक्रीटेड में से फिल्टर्ड निकाल दें. जितना भी बाहर निकला उसमें से फिल्टर्ड निकाल दें तो आपको पता चलेगा सिक्रीशन रेट क्या है. फ्रैक्शनल एक्सक्रीशन ऑफ सोडियम इज़ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. इसमें हम फ्रैक्शनल सिक्रीशन ऑफ सोडियम में देखते हैं वी डिवाइड द सोडियम एक्सक्रीटेड डिवाइडेड बाय सोडियम फिल्टर्ड. सो बेसिकली द फ्रैक्शनल एक्सक्रीशन ऑफ सोडियम इज़ बेसिकली the excreted sodium divided by the filtered sodium. How will you calculate the sodium excreted? You will basically use this formula. The flow of urine multiplied by the substance concentration of that in the urine divided by the filtered sodium. Basically the GFR into the plasma concentration of the sodium. Now, where GFR is basically what? The GFR is basically the flow of creatinine multiplied into the urine flow divided by the plasma concentration of creatinine. That's your GFR, right? So once you put the GFR here, you're going to use this equation, the plasma concentration of the creatinine into the multiplied by the flow of sodium divided by the plasma concentration of sodium multiplied by the the urine concentration of creatinine. So you're going to multiply this to overall get the percentage of the fractional excreted sodium. Now this is important because if it's less than 2%, if it's less than 1% or 2%, we call it pre-renal azotemia. So basically the injury or is the problem lies before the kidneys, and if it's if it's more than 2%, basically like 3%, it's usually found in ICU patients when they have an acute tubular injury, like an acute tubular necrosis problem. So this is why we calculate the fractional secreted sodium. Now we have something called glucose clearance. Glucose at a normal plasma level at 60 to 120 milligram is completely reabsorbed using the proximal convoluted tubule. The SGLT2 transporter in the proximal convoluted tubule basically reabsorbs all of the glucose. Now normally there is a transport maximum in the kidney nephrons. The kidney nephrons have a transport maximum called the 375 milligram per minute, but all of the nephrons don't have the exact same transport maximum. They reach the steam at different levels. So there is a plasma glucose threshold for kidney which is 200 milligram per deciliter. In pregnancy this threshold decreases. Okay, so in pregnancy you find the glucose in urine much earlier than in normal physiological states. So now the transport maximum is reached in a normal kidney. Now suddenly you don't get the presence of glucose in urine, and the presence of glucose in urine doesn't increase suddenly. It gradually increases. Now that gradual increase display is seen because the different nephrons they reach that TM differently. It's not a sharp reach. This is because of the heterogeneity of nephrons, different TM points for different nephrons. So the titration curve is seen, the display is seen because of that. Okay, and in adults after 200 milligram per deciliter the glucosuria begins. You start seeing urine in the glucose. Now we have some special drugs, the Flozin drugs, the drugs that end in Flozin, dapagliflozin and so on. We use those drugs in diabetic patients, so the urine is lost in the glucose is lost in urine much earlier than the threshold of 200 milligram per deciliter. Okay, now moving on, this is a very important high yield physiology, nephron transport physiology. We are going to talk about the early proximal convoluted tubule, everything that happens there. Then we have the thin descending loop of Henle. Then we have the thick ascending loop of Henle. We have the early distal convoluted tubule, and we have the collecting tubule. Okay, now one thing I'm going to explain all of this in a way that I try to put all of the things together. So whatever medicine comes in, whatever disease comes in, I'm going to talk about it while we are explaining all of this. Okay, so first thing foremost, we're going to talk about the proximal convoluted tubule. The early proximal convoluted tubule is very important. If you want to remember it by one statement, it is where the bulk reabsorption takes place. Bulk reabsorption of what? We have 65 to 80% of sodium being reabsorbed. Then we have a lot of water being reabsorbed. Then we have hydrogen carbonate being reabsorbed. We have some of the phosphate being reabsorbed, but the phosphate is dependent on the parathyroid hormone. Okay, then we have most of all of these substances are being reabsorbed in the proximal convoluted tubule. It contains a brush border. Okay, you can remember that. It reabsorbs all the glucose and amino acids, and mostly it reabsorbs hydrogen carbonate. Okay, it reabsorbs hydrogen carbonate, it reabsorbs sodium, it reabsorbs chloride, it reabsorbs phosphate, it reabsorbs potassium, and it reabsorbs water and uric acid. Okay, now this is basically isotonic absorption. It generates and secretes ammonia, which enables the kidney to secrete more hydrogen. That is something you can remember. Okay, now look at this. Now this is the proximal convoluted tubule. Okay, so first of all, what we have in the proximal convoluted tubule is the bulk reabsorption happening. Okay, so we have the sodium glucose transport happening here. The sodium glucose transport is happening, and now one thing to remember is that with this sodium also hitchhikes the phosphate. Okay, so basically 80 to 85% of the filtered phosphate is reabsorbed in the proximal convoluted tubule, but it's not shown here. What happens is when this sodium is delivered into the blood, more sodium has to enter it. So when the sodium is being reabsorbed, the phosphate hitchhikes on the sodium and enters the is getting reabsorbed. Okay, so now first of all, the sodium glucose transporter, this is the SGLT2 transporter. The SGLT2 inhibitors like Flozin drugs inhibit this here. Okay, the other thing is angiotensin 2. Apart from constricting the arteriole in the efferent arteriole of the kidney, as we saw here, I'll show it to you. So look at the angiotensin 2 preferentially constricts the efferent arteriole, right? Apart from doing that, what else it does? The angiotensin 2 causes more sodium being reabsorbed into the proximal convoluted tubule and more hydrogen being spilled into the urine. Okay, so this is a sodium hydrogen exchanger which is promoted by the angiotensin 2. Then we have something called the carbonic anhydrase inhibitor. Carbonic anhydrase inhibitor does what basically? It brings the hydrogen carbonate inside. Since it brings the hydrogen carbonate inside, this can be blocked by acetazolamide. So acetazolamide, what it does, it inhibits the carbonic anhydrase here, and hydrogen carbonate is lost in the urine. Since hydrogen carbonate is lost in the urine, what happens is the urine becomes alkaline, and in the body you get a metabolic acidosis state. Okay, now this is all about the proximal convoluted tubule. Now we move on to the thin descending loop of Henle. This passively reabsorbs all the water via medullary hypertonicity. This is impermeable to sodium. So basically you concentrate the segment and you make the urate hypertonic. So what happens in thin descending loop of Henle, you passively reabsorb all the water via the medullary hypertonicity. What happens is all the water is reabsorbed and sodium is unchanged. So what happens is that since the water is reabsorbed, the urine becomes hypertonic. अब हमारे पास आ जाता है थिन डिसेंडिंग लूप ऑफ हेनली. लेकिन थिन डिसेंडिंग लूप ऑफ हेनली से जाने से पहले हम एक प्रॉब्लम देखेंगे जो अर्ली प्रॉक्सिमल कॉन्वोल्यूटेड ट्यूब्यूल्स में होती है. ठीक है, अर्ली प्रॉक्सिमल कॉन्वोल्यूटेड ट्यूब्यूल में क्या चीज़ होती है हम ये देखते हैं. अर्ली प्रॉक्सिमल कॉन्वोल्यूटेड ट्यूब्यूल का एक जनरलाइज्ड रीअब्जॉर्प्शन डिफेक्ट होता है. इसको हम फैनकोनी सिंड्रोम कहते हैं. फैनकोनी सिंड्रोम में देयर इज इंक्रीज्ड एक्सक्रीशन ऑफ अमाइनो एसिड्स, ग्लूकोज, हाइड्रोजन कार्बोनेट एंड फॉस्फेट. ये सारे सब्सटेंसेज रीअब्जॉर्ब होते हैं बाय पीसीटी. ये सारे सब्सटेंसेज रीअब्जॉर्ब होते हैं बाय प्रॉक्सिमल कॉन्वोल्यूटेड ट्यूब्यूल एंड दिस में लीड टू मेटाबॉलिक एसिडोसिस, प्रॉक्सिमल रीनल ट्यूबुलर इंजरी. So we're basically generalized losing all of this amino acids, glucose, hydrogen carbonate and phosphate. All of these substances जो normally proximal convoluted tubule से reabsorb होते हैं वो हो नहीं पाते because reabsorption defect होता है proximal convoluted tubule में. इससे आपको metabolic acidosis मिलता है. सब कुछ आप basically excrete कर रहे हो, reabsorb नहीं कर पा रहे, तो proximal renal tubular acidosis होता है. Hypophosphatemia होता है क्योंकि phosphate भी जो है आप excrete कर रहे हो, आप उसको reabsorb नहीं कर पा रहे. और ऑस्टियोपीनिया होता है. ऑस्टियोपीनिया भी इसीलिए हो सकता है क्योंकि फॉस्फेट आप बेसिकली एक्सक्रीट कर रहे हो. हेरिडिटरी इफेक्ट्स इसके ये कहाँ आपको मिलता है? हेरिडिटरी इफेक्ट्स मिलते हैं जैसे कि विल्सन डिजीज़ में मिल जाएगा, टायरोसिनीमिया में मिल जाएगा, ग्लाइकोजन स्टोरेज डिजीज़ में मिलेगा, इस्चीमिया में मिलेगा, मल्टीपल माइलोमा में मिलेगा, नेफ्रोटॉक्सिक ड्रग्स जैसे कि आइफॉस्फेमाइड, सिस्प्लैटिन या लेड पॉइजनिंग में आपको ये प्रॉब्लम मिल सकता है. ठीक है, अब हम आगे चलते हैं. ये हमने फैनकोनी सिंड्रोम पढ़ दिया. ठीक है, फैनकोनी सिंड्रोम बेसिकली आपका प्रॉक्सिमल कॉन्वोल्यूटेड ट्यूब्यूल में होता है. एक आपका रीअब्जॉर्प्शन डिफेक्ट होता है एंड दिस में लीड टू मेटाबॉलिक एसिडोसिस इन द प्रॉक्सिमल रीनल ट्यूब्यूल. ठीक है, इन द प्रॉक्सिमल कॉन्वोल्यूटेड ट्यूब्यूल. ठीक है, अब हम वहाँ पे चलते हैं. प्रॉक्सिमल कॉन्वोल्यूटेड ट्यूब्यूल के बाद हमने क्या पढ़ा था? थिन डिसेंडिंग लूप ऑफ हेनली, जो कि पैसिवली सारा का सारा वाटर आपका 15% वाटर रीअब्जॉर्ब कर लेता है और उसकी वजह से जो आपकी यूरिन होती है वो हाइपरटोनिक हो जाती है क्योंकि वाटर आपने रीअब्जॉर्ब कर लिया. उसके बाद हम जाते हैं थिक असेंडिंग लूप ऑफ हेनली. थिक असेंडिंग लूप ऑफ हेनली में सबसे इंपॉर्टेंट पार्ट होता है सोडियम पोटेशियम क्लोराइड. सोडियम पोटेशियम 2 क्लोराइड जो है ना थिक असेंडिंग लूप में, ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट होता है. ये जो है इस बेसिक काम ये कर रहा होता है, ये आपका रीअब्जॉर्ब करता है सोडियम पोटेशियम और क्लोराइड को और इनडायरेक्टली ये पैरासेलुलर रीअब्जॉर्प्शन कराता है मैग्नीशियम और कैल्शियम की. एक पॉजिटिव ह्यूमन पोटेंशियल ग्रेडियंट क्रिएट होता है पोटेशियम के बैक लीक से. ये सारा पोटेशियम सोडियम पोटेशियम अंदर आया 2 क्लोराइड और अब ये पोटेशियम बैक लीक करता है. जब ये पोटेशियम बैक लीक करता है तो ये एक पॉजिटिव ग्रेडियंट बनाता है जिसकी वजह से पैरासेलुलरली मैग्नीशियम और कैल्शियम अंदर आ जाते हैं. ठीक है, अब ये जो सोडियम पोटेशियम 2 क्लोराइड ट्रांसपोर्टर है दिस कैन बी ब्लॉक्ड बाय लूप डायरेटिक्स लाइक फुरासेमाइड. ठीक है, फुरासेमाइड इसको ब्लॉक करता है एंड दैट्स व्हाई इट्स अ लूप डायरेटिक. ठीक है, दिस इंटायर थिक असेंडिंग limb is impermeable to water and this makes the urine less concentrated as it ascends because it's impermeable to water. So since it's impermeable to water and makes the urine concentrated as it ascends, 10 to 20% सोडियम यहाँ पे रीअब्जॉर्ब हो रहा होता है. अब थिक असेंडिंग लूप ऑफ हेनली में हमारे पास एक डिजीज़ है और वो हम देख लेते हैं, वो है बार्टर सिंड्रोम. बार्टर सिंड्रोम इज़ अ रीअब्जॉर्प्शन डिफेक्ट इन थिक असेंडिंग लूप ऑफ हेनली. इट अफेक्ट्स द सोडियम पोटेशियम 2 क्लोराइड. अब सोडियम पोटेशियम 2 क्लोराइड का कौन ब्लॉक करता है? फुरासेमाइड वाज ब्लॉकिंग दिस, राइट? सो इट एक्ट्स लाइक अ क्रॉनिक यूज ऑफ लूप डायरेटिक बट एक्चुअली इट्स अ रीअब्जॉर्प्शन डिफेक्ट इन थिक असेंडिंग लूप ऑफ हेनली. इट कॉजेज बेसिकली मेटाबॉलिक एल्कलोसिस, hypokalemia and hypercalciuria. It causes इसके इफेक्ट्स क्या होते हैं? अगर आपके पास थिक असेंडिंग लूप ऑफ हेनरी में एक रीअब्जॉर्प्शन डिफेक्ट है सोडियम पोटेशियम 2 क्लोराइड का, तो आपको मेटाबॉलिक एल्कलोसिस मिलेगा, हाइपोकेलीमिया मिलेगा और हाइपरकैल्सीयूरिया मिलेगा। हाइपरकैल्सीयूरिया क्यों मिलेगा? कि आपके पास ये सोडियम पोटेशियम 2 क्लोराइड तो आ ही नहीं रहा अंदर, क्योंकि वो अंदर आ नहीं रहा तो आपके पास पोटेशियम का बैक लीक नहीं हो रहा, पोटेशियम का बैक लीक नहीं हो रहा और कैल्शियम भी अंदर नहीं आ पा रही, तो कैल्शियम आपकी वेस्ट होती है यूरिन में। इसकी वजह से यू गेट हाइपरकैल्सीयूरिया एंड यू गेट हाइपोकेलीमिया, क्योंकि पोटेशियम का आपको बैक लीक नहीं हो रहा और मेटाबॉलिक, इसी वजह से मेटाबॉलिक एल्कलोसिस हो रहा है आपका पास। ये एक ऑटोसोमल रिसेसिव डिजीज़ है एंड इट प्रेजेंट सिमिलरली टू क्रॉनिक लूप डायरेटिक यूज़। ठीक हो गया। अब नेक्स्ट पार्ट पे चलते हैं। नेक्स्ट पार्ट हमारा है बेसिकली अर्ली डिस्टल कॉन्वोल्यूटेड ट्यूब्यूल। अर्ली डिस्टल कॉन्वोल्यूटेड ट्यूब्यूल पे आपका पैराथायरॉयड हार्मोन भी काम करता है, ठीक है। पैराथायरॉयड हार्मोन यहाँ पे भी काम करता है और प्रॉक्सिमल कॉन्वोल्यूटेड ट्यूब्यूल पे भी काम करता है, लेकिन 80% जो आपका फॉस्फेट होता है ना वो प्रॉक्सिमल कॉन्वोल्यूटेड ट्यूब्यूल से ही रीअब्जॉर्ब होता है, लेकिन थोड़ा सा पैराथायरॉयड हार्मोन 20% यहाँ पे भी काम करता है अर्ली डिस्टल कॉन्वोल्यूटेड ट्यूब्यूल में, ठीक है। अर्ली डिस्टल कॉन्वोल्यूटेड ट्यूब्यूल में यू रीअब्जॉर्ब द सोडियम, you reabsorb the sodium and the chloride, okay, and it's impermeable to water and this makes the urine fully dilute. बेसिकली आपके पास यहाँ पे एक सोडियम क्लोराइड एक्सचेंजर है विच कैन बी ब्लॉक्ड बाय थायजाइड डायरेटिक्स, ठीक है। तो क्या होता है कि अर्ली डिस्टल कॉन्वोल्यूटेड ट्यूब्यूल में आपके पास you have the in the early distal convoluted tubule you have thiazide diuretics that are acting at the sodium chloride channel. Now sodium chloride exchanger here is sodium chloride channel here is very important. Why? Because there's a tubulo-glomerular feedback that's happening here. Now the tubular glomerular feedback is a local autoregulatory mechanism by which the macula densa adjusts the glomerular filtration rate based on NaCl delivery in the distal tubule. Now in the distal convoluted tubule you have basically the sodium chloride delivery, and this basically allows the macula densa to sense if the blood pressure is high or if the blood pressure is low, and then it automatically adjusts the glomerular filtration rate. So the macula densa cells here in the distal convoluted tubule act as a key sensor. They are part of the distal tubule. They sense the sodium chloride concentration, not volume. They sense the sodium chloride concentration, and basically sodium chloride concentration reflects the GFR and tubular flow. So basically, if you have high NaCl, if you have high sodium chloride, what does this mean? This means the BP is very high. Right? The BP is high, the GFR is high, the filtrate is flowing too fast. So the kidney risks losing sodium and water. So what this does is basically the high sodium chloride and macula densa releases ATP, and the ATP goes and releases adenosine, and they decrease the nitric oxide and they decrease the prostaglandins, right? Now since they decrease the nitric oxide and they decrease the prostaglandins, what happens is if there is less prostaglandin, you have afferent arteriolar constriction, because what was prostaglandin doing? Prostaglandins were basically, when they were increased, they were causing dilation of the afferent arteriole, so a lot of blood was passing from there. But now the sodium chloride is really high, the blood pressure is really high, and the filtrate is moving too fast. So what's happening is that the kidney risks losing that sodium and the kidney risks losing that water. Now what happens is that the kidney basically causes decreased nitric oxide and decreased prostaglandins and increased adenosine, which causes afferent arteriolar constriction. Afferent arteriolar constriction decreases renal blood flow, it decreases glomerular hydrostatic pressure, and it decreases the GFR. Right? Now this prevents excessive salt and water loss. In high blood pressure states, the scary part is to prevent excessive salt and water loss. Why? Because it's going to protect the glomerulus from pressure damage. Right? Because if a lot of filtrate is passing too fast and the GFR is too high, your glomerulus can have pressure damages. So increased sodium chloride tells the macula densa that the blood pressure is too high. It quickly releases adenosine. The adenosine causes afferent constriction, and afferent constriction decreases the GFR. Now what happens this is all happening here. What happens at low sodium chloride? At low sodium chloride, the macula densa is that the blood pressure is too low, the GFR is too low, the filtrate is flowing too slowly in the glomerulus. So body may be hypovolemic or hypotensive. So what does the body has to do in this situation? The body has to quickly release nitric oxide and quickly release prostaglandins. It's the opposite of what we just studied in high blood pressure. So it quickly releases nitric oxide, it quickly releases prostaglandins, and this causes afferent arterial dilation. This causes afferent arteriolar dilation. Afferent is the arriving plasma that dilates. When that dilates, something else we see is that the renin is released. The renin is released from juxtaglomerular cells. That activates the RAS system. The RAAS system is activated, angiotensin 2 is released, and there is preferential efferent constriction. So afferent is dilated and efferent is constricted. What will that do? The incoming pipe is now fat and the outgoing pipe is very tight. What will happen? The pressure between these two pipes is now going to increase. So the glomerular filtration rate increases, and this basically preserves the blood pressure and increases sodium and water reabsorption because blood pressure is low, right? And we need to do something through which we can preserve the sodium and water absorption. So whenever sodium chloride is low, nitric oxide and prostaglandins are increased, which basically cause afferent dilation, and then renin is also released. What renin does is it activates the angiotensin 2 from the RAS system, and then that increases that causes efferent constriction through angiotensin 2, and the outgoing pipe is then tightened and the GFR basically increases. Now let's study this on another page, since if we cover it here, you will know it a lot better than other before. This is your juxtaglomerular apparatus. What is the juxtaglomerular apparatus? It consists of mesangial cells that we saw in the glomerulus apparatus. The juxtaglomerular cells are modified smooth muscles of afferent arteriole. So it only is affected by the afferent arteriole, right? And the macula densa. So the macula densa is a sodium chloride sensor located at the distal end of loop of Henle. The juxtaglomerular cells secrete renin in response to decreased renal blood pressure and increased sympathetic tone through beta-1 receptors. So basically what happens is the sodium chloride, when it's basically the macula densa is like a sodium chloride sensor. When it senses that the sodium chloride is when it senses that the sodium chloride is low and there's low blood pressure, it means the filtrate is passing too slowly. The body needs to conserve the salts, right? So suddenly, quickly, what this does is it releases nitric oxide and prostaglandins, and what the juxtaglomerular cells also does, it secretes renin. When renin is released in response to decreased renal blood pressure and increased sympathetic tone, the macula densa cells sense decreased sodium chloride delivery to distal convoluted tubule. This increases the renin release, and this causes efferent arteriolar vasoconstriction, which I said the outgoing pipe is now tightened, and this increases the glomerular filtration rate. The juxtaglomerular apparatus maintains the GFR via renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system. So angiotensin and aldosterone are both acting here. We will see the path of aldosterone in the next segment. In addition to vasodilatory properties, beta blockers can decrease blood pressure by inhibiting beta-1 blockers of the juxtaglomerular apparatus. This decreases renin release. Okay, now going back to our image here, there's another thing that happens in the distal convoluted tubule. There's a reabsorption defect of sodium chloride in distal convoluted tubule. So what happens in Gittelman syndrome? In Gittelman syndrome, there's a reabsorption defect of sodium chloride in distal convoluted tubule. So if sodium chloride is not being reabsorbed in distal convoluted tubule, what will happen? You will have metabolic alkalosis. You will have hypomagnesemia because magnesium is not being involved now. You will have hypokalemia, potassium is being lost. Hypocalciuria, calcium is also being lost. Okay, and this is an autosomal recessive disease. It presents similarly to lifelong thiazide diuretic use. It's less severe than Bartter syndrome. Bartter syndrome that we studied, the absorption defect of the ascending loop of Henle is more severe than Gittelman syndrome, right? So this is the basically, and it acts just like a thiazide diuretic chronic use, because what do thiazide diuretics do? Thiazide diuretics are basically effectively blocking the sodium chloride transport here, right? That's what thiazide diuretics do, and that's why you get hypercalciuria, because this calcium is not being absorbed here in the Gittelman syndrome. Okay, now we move on to the collecting tubule. The collecting tubule is very important and it's high yield because 2-3 things are happening at the same time in the collecting tubule. Now in the collecting tubule, what happens is this is the final regulator of urine compensation. It does the fine tuning, not bulk reabsorption, right?
So it extends from connecting tubule, cortical connecting tubule, to cortical collecting duct and the medullary collecting duct. We have different cell types here. We have principal cells, we have alpha intercalated cells, and we have beta intercalated cells. So in the principal cells, what happens is you have the function of the principal cells is basically to reabsorb sodium via epithelial sodium channels, to secrete potassium, and to reabsorb water. These are the three things that are happening in the principal cell. You reabsorb sodium via these epithelial sodium channels, okay, and then the second thing is you secrete potassium, and the third thing is you reabsorb water. Now one thing to know here is that water will only and only be reabsorbed in the collecting tubule via ADH, your antidiuretic hormone. This is the only way that water will be reabsorbed in the collecting tubule. If there is no antidiuretic hormone, you will have dilutional urine, and your urine will be diluted because the water will be lost, because the only way that water can be reabsorbed in the collecting tubule is through antidiuretic hormone. Antidiuretic hormone increases the insertion of V2 receptors. These are aquaporins of the vesicle membrane, and that causes the reabsorption of water. Okay, so there's a hormonal control also happening here. We have aldosterone, and aldosterone affects the principal cells and the alpha intercalated cells both. Through the principal cells and alpha intercalated cells, what aldosterone does is basically it increases the sodium reabsorption and potassium secretion. Here you can see the sodium potassium ATPase. The sodium is being reabsorbed and potassium is being secreted. So if aldosterone is not working properly, or if you don't have aldosterone, you have some insufficiency of aldosterone, what will happen is sodium will be lost and potassium will be retained. And the other thing, if you have primary hyperaldosteronism, if you have too much aldosterone in your body, what will happen? Too much sodium will be reabsorbed and too much potassium will be secreted, right? The opposite thing will happen. One thing to remember here is there's a Liddle syndrome. Right, there's a Liddle syndrome. In the Liddle syndrome, what happens is this ENaC delivery, this sodium channel, this epithelial sodium channel, the one that is bringing the sodium inside the principal cells, is basically overactive. Since it's overactive, so too much sodium comes in to these principal cells. Okay. Now, there's something also called as the acid-base balance. Now, the kidney also is a very big participator of acid-base balance. A way to remember this is the alpha intercalated cells help in acidosis. So it starts with A, so it helps in acidosis. What it does is it secretes the hydrogen out and it reabsorbs hydrogen carbonate. So it helps the body in acidosis. What happens in base secretion? In alkalosis, B for beta intercalated, B for base secretion. In alkalosis, you need the base to be released. So in beta intercalated cells basically secrete hydrogen carbonate and reabsorb hydrogen, and this is what happens in alkalosis, right? Now the collecting duct is the only nephron segment that can excrete hydrogen or hydrogen carbonate directly, right? Now let's go and see what the Liddle syndrome is. So the Liddle syndrome, we will see here. The Liddle syndrome is a gain of function mutation. The sodium channel degradation happens and sodium reabsorption is increased in collecting tubules. What you get here is basically metabolic alkalosis, hypokalemia, hypertension. Because so much sodium is being retained, you get hypertension and aldosterone is then decreased. This is an autosomal dominant disease and presents similarly to hyperaldosteronism, but aldosterone is nearly undetectable, and the treatment to this is amiloride. Right, you give amiloride in Liddle syndrome. So amiloride has L, and Liddle syndrome also starts with L. You can remember it like that. Now we have something else also. This is called the syndrome of apparent mineralocorticoid excess. SIAME. Syndrome of apparent mineralocorticoid excess. What happens here is that cortisol activates mineralocorticoid receptors. 11 beta HSD converts cortisol to cortisone. This inactive on these receptors. Hereditary 11 beta HSD deficiency happens, and the cortisol is increased, mineralocorticoid receptor is increased. So what happens is you get hypokalemia, hypertension, decreased serum aldosterone. Cortisol tries to be the same as aldosterone. It's an autosomal recessive disorder. What you do in this is you give potassium sparing diuretics. right? Potassium sparing diuretics decrease mineralocorticoid effects or corticosteroids, and that's basically what you do in this syndrome of same. We'll come back to it later, but first let's finish this collecting tubule theory here. So the collecting tubule reabsorbs sodium in exchange for, this is the collecting tubule, and we saw that aldosterone was also participating. If you get one more thing was that when you get high ADH, there's too much ADH, like syndrome of inappropriate SIADH, syndrome of inappropriate secretion of ADH. What happens is you get excess ADH, right? In SIADH, you get excess ADH, so there's a lot of water reabsorption and there's dilutional hyponatremia. So much water is being reabsorbed that the sodium already present is diluted, right? And in diabetes insipidus, you have two types of diabetes insipidus. One is central, one is nephrogenic. In central diabetes insipidus, the problem is that the ADH is decreased. Since the ADH is decreased, you overall get polyuria and dilute urine. But there is another kind of diabetes which is nephrogenic diabetes, and this is where the ADH is present, but the kidneys are unresponsive to ADH, right? Again, you get polyuria and dilute urine, but these are two ways of, there are two types of diabetes. One is diabetes central insipidus, in which the ADH is not being released, it's less, and the other is nephrogenic diabetes, where the kidneys are unresponsive to ADH, right? Now there's something as primary hyperaldosteronism. In primary hyperaldosteronism, sodium retention is a lot. Of course, if there's too much aldosterone, there's so much sodium being retained here, right? And there's a lot of potassium loss through this channel, and this causes metabolic alkalosis, and you treat this with spironolactone. Another medicine that we can use to treat this is eplerenone. Okay, these two medicines stop this from happening. So the collecting tubule basically reabsorbs sodium in exchange for secreting potassium and hydrogen. This is regulated by aldosterone, and aldosterone acts on the mineralocorticoid receptors. This increases the mRNA protein synthesis in principal cells, and that increases the apical potassium conductance. Right, so aldosterone, basically what it does is, here in aldosterone, this acts on the receptor. This is a mineralocorticoid receptor, and I told you that in the syndrome of a mineralocorticoid excess also, we were giving the medicine eplerenone and spironolactone, right? We were giving potassium sparing diuretics. This aldosterone antagonist and this amiloride and trimetadine, all of these are potassium sparing diuretics. So we give this also in the syndrome where there's too much mineralocorticoid excess, because what is the mineralocorticoid receptors doing? They are basically taking in too much sodium and releasing too much potassium, right? So what usually happens is, aldosterone, what normally does is, it causes a mineralocorticoid receptor protein synthesis, and what happens is, there's too much potassium conductance, the sodium potassium pump gets activated, and epithelial sodium channel activity increases, and there's lumen negativity. This causes potassium secretion. In alpha intercalated cells, you get lumen negativity, and through the hydrogen ATPase activity, this hydrogen ATPase activity, this one, right? So this hydrogen ATPase activity increases the hydrogen secretion, and this causes the hydrogen carbonate chloride exchanger activity. This activity, right? So overall, you can just remember that the alpha intercalated cells help to lose hydrogen, the beta intercalated cells help to lose base, which is hydrogen carbonate, and aldosterone basically acts on the mineralocorticoid receptors. The mineralocorticoid receptors basically so basically in the principal cells, it increases the apical potassium conductance. Okay, this is the apical potassium conductance here. Okay, and that increases the sodium potassium pump. When this conductance is increased, when this potassium is lost, this is the sodium potassium pump, this conductance is increased. When this is increased, another thing happens, this epithelial sodium channel gets activated, and that causes lumen negativity. So potassium is then secreted. And what happens in the alpha intercalated cells? Lumen negativity is happening, right? So in the alpha intercalated cells, the lumen negativity causes the hydrogen ATPase, this hydrogen ATPase activity, and increases hydrogen secretion. This causes the hydrogen carbonate chloride exchanger activity. right? So all of this is interlinked. The ADH acts at V2 receptors. It inserts aquaporin water channels on apical sites, and water is reabsorbed. 3 to 5% of sodium is reabsorbed here. Now we've studied all these defects while we were studying that nephron physiology, and I think that's better. I will revise the syndrome of parent mineralocorticoid excess, that the treatment is potassium sparing diuretics, because potassium sparing diuretics decrease this mineralocorticoid effects or corticosteroids, and what that does is basically less mineralocorticoid receptor activation. Here we saw this mineralocorticoid receptor activation is done less, so that's something we do. We give amiloride as a treatment to this problem. Okay, potassium sparing diuretics. Moving on, we have the relative concentration or along proximal convoluted tubules. Now along the proximal convoluted tubule, we said this is the area where the bulk reabsorption is happening, right? So this is the relative concentration along the PCT. Now this is a curve. This is the tubular fluid against plasma. This is the tubular fluid plasma and distance along PCT length. So as you're going along the proximal convoluted tubule, this is what happens to the concentration of the tubular fluid plasma. Right, so to understand this, you must know that the tubular fluid against plasma is more than 1 when solute is reabsorbed less quickly than water, or when solute is secreted. So this is the level at which water is being reabsorbed. So if it's more than 1, all of these more than 1 is when the solute is reabsorbed less quickly than water. Water is reabsorbed better, and this solute is reabsorbed less quickly. So most when solute is reduced less quickly, the slowest absorption is done of the para-aminohubric acid, and then is of creatinine, and then is inulin. Inulin is basically, the inulin clearance is very close to GFR, so we use inulin to estimate our GFR rates. Then comes urea, then comes chloride, then comes potassium, and osmolarity is the same as sodium. I always told you that sodium pulls in water with it, right? Because its osmolarity is the same as water. And tubular fluid plus slash plasma concentration is 1 when solute and water are reabsorbed at the same rate. What's that? That's sodium. And it's when the tubular fluid slash plasma is less than 1, that's when solid is reabsorbed more quickly than water. So what is absorbed more quickly? Glucose is the quickest reabsorbed substance. It's 100% reabsorbed in the proximal convoluted tubule. It only stops and spills in the urine when the TM 375 milligram is reached. Then that's when you get glucosuria and diabetes mellitus, right? Then the quickest thing to be reabsorbed is glucose, then we get amino acids, and then we get hydrogen carbonate, right? So inulin concentration rises because water is reabsorbed, not because more inulin is added. Do you see here that the inulin is rising? This is because water is reabsorbed, not because more inulin is added. Okay. Now, tubular inulin increases in concentration but not amount along the PCT as a result of water reabsorption. Chloride reabsorption occurs at a slower rate than sodium. You can watch the chloride here. It occurs at a slower rate than sodium. Then sodium in early proximal convoluted, and then matches the rate of sodium reabsorption more distally. When it comes, you can see that it plateaus and then reaches the sodium rate. But earlier it's slower, right? So what happens is thus its relative concentration increases before it plateaus. First, the concentration of chloride increases, it's very quickly reabsorbed, and then it's less quickly reabsorbed than water, and then it plateaus. See, okay, this is your graph to show you some concentration curves. Then there's something I would like to revise here. This is the renin-angiotensin system. So let's just look at this. This is important. Okay. So the renin-angiotensin system, if there's a drop in blood pressure and a drop in fluid volume, what the kidney does is renin releases from the kidney, from the juxtaglomerular apparatus. Now this causes angiotensinogen from the liver to be converted to angiotensin 1. The renin acts on angiotensinogen to form angiotensin 1. Once the angiotensinogen from the liver is converted to angiotensin 1, the angiotensin converting enzyme ACE is released from the lungs. From the lungs, the ACE is released and the angiotensin 1 becomes angiotensin 2. This angiotensin 2 then acts on the adrenal gland to stimulate the release of aldosterone. This aldosterone then goes and acts on the mineralocorticoid receptors that we saw on the alpha intercalated cells, on the principal cells and alpha intercalated cells. This aldosterone acts on the kidneys to stimulate reabsorption of salt and water. So salt and water are reabsorbed when aldosterone on the kidneys is stimulated through the angiotensin pathway. So we know that there's a drop in blood pressure, there's a drop in fluid volume, the renin is released from the kidney. This renin makes the liver give you angiotensinogen. The angiotensinogen is converted, the renin acts on the angiotensinogen to convert it into angiotensin 1. Now the angiotensinogen 1 you have. Now we need ACE, angiotensin converting enzyme from the lungs. ACE converts the angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. Once angiotensin 2 is formed, the angiotensin 2 goes on the adrenal gland. On the adrenal gland, it goes and tells the adrenal gland to secrete aldosterone. Aldosterone then goes to the kidney and tells the kidney to stimulate absorption of salt, stimulate reabsorption of salt and water to conserve this, right? And angiotensin 2 also acts directly on blood vessels. What does the angiotensin 2 does directly on blood vessels? It causes vasoconstriction. And what does the angiotensin 2 do on the efferent arteriole? It causes vasoconstriction of the efferent arteriole also to preserve the glomerular function. Okay, so this was really important that I wanted to discuss here. This is the renin angiotensin aldosterone system, right? So the renin angiotensin aldosterone system, what is it doing? The renal baroreceptors, what are the renal baroreceptors? They are basically the macula densa. The sodium chloride delivery is sensed by the macula densa cells, and that increases the sympathetic tone by beta 1 receptors. This is done in the distal convoluted tubule we saw. So the afferent arteriole, the efferent arteriole and the juxtaglomerular cells are in the distal convoluted tubule. These are the macula densa. And this is the same thing. The angiotensinogen is being released by the liver. The juxtaglomerular cells are making renin. That renin converts the angiotensinogen to angiotensin 1. The angiotensin 1 is then converted into angiotensin 2 using the ACE enzyme from the lungs. And then what happens is the angiotensin 2 basically causes a lot of things that we will see now. But remember that the ACE enzyme also causes the bradykinin breakdown. This bradykinin breakdown is why we get dry cough when we use angiotensin receptor blockers. Remember that, because this also goes and breaks down all your leukotrienes, right? Okay, moving on, we have the angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 does a lot of things. Let's see what angiotensin 2. First, angiotensin 2 goes to angiotensin 2 receptor type 1 and causes vasoconstriction of blood vessels. Vasoconstriction of blood vessels increases blood pressure. Why is this important? Because we said that the sodium chloride delivery to macula densa was less. The blood pressure was falling. The renal receptors sensed this and quickly went through all of this pathway to release angiotensin 2. So angiotensin 2 first causes vasoconstriction and increases the blood pressure. Then it goes and constricts the efferent arteriole. Constricting the efferent arteriole quickly increases the filtration fraction, and this preserves the glomerular filtration rate when renal blood flow is less. Then we and what happens is, this is very important because this preserves the GFR function and glomerulus is not damaged. Now it also goes to the kidney and it tells the kidney to do reabsorption of salt and water. It increases the sodium hydrogen activity in the kidney in the and then this in the proximal convoluted tubule. What the angiotensin 2 does it increases sodium hydrogen activity, and sodium and hydrogen carbonate and water are all reabsorbed. This permits contraction alkalosis. Then it goes and releases aldosterone from the adrenal gland. As aldosterone is then released, and aldosterone works on two cells, the principal cells in the collecting tubule and the alpha intercalated cells. Both of these are affected by the aldosterone through the mineralocorticoid receptor. The mineralocorticoid receptor increases mRNA synthesis and then gets activated. The alpha intercalated cells increases hydrogen secretion through hydrogen ATPase activity, and the principal cells of the renal cells do two things. They through the aldosterone, it basically causes the sodium reabsorption and potassium secretion. Sodium is reabsorbed and potassium is secreted. Potassium conductance is increased. The sodium potassium ATPase, the ENaC activity are all increased. And through the ADH, what angiotensin 2 goes to the hypothalamus. It tells hypothalamus that we need to increase ADH. ADH, antidiuretic hormone, is released. Antidiuretic hormone increases the aqua 2 porine cells through the ADPQI receptor in the posterior pituitary. The antidiuretic hormone ADH. Antidiuretic hormone is released from the posterior pituitary. The hypothalamus takes angiotensin 2. The angiotensin 2 works on the hypothalamus, and from the posterior pituitary ADH is released. The ADH comes and works on the principal cells in the collecting tubule of the kidney, the renal cells, and this causes water reabsorption via aquaporins, right? So this is only what is revised here, and I've explained all of this except for two things, that the ANP and BNP. Now ANP and BNP, ANP A for atria, released from atria, and ventricles. B, you can remember that it's not A, so it's from ventricles. Now ventricles release BNP, and ANP is relieved from atria in response to increased volume. So in heart failure patients who have a high volume, you always see ANP BNP increase. This inhibits the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. Why? Because blood pressure is high, there's a lot of volume. This relaxes vascular smooth muscles by the CGMP and increases glomerular filtration rate. Why? So more volume can be lost, and renin is decreased. So all of this pathway is interrupted. It dilates the afferent arteriole and promotes natriuresis. All of this helps to decrease the volume issues in heart failure. The rest I have all explained.